or English Racing Automobiles as it was better known, built production racing cars in the 1930s. They raced in the Voiturette class that complemented Grand Prix racing of the time, and they were very successful. On Autofiles, we tell the story of ERA. The first of 17 ERAs appeared in 1934, and their influence on British motor racing continues right up to the present day. Of those 17 cars, 16 are still in existence and racing in historic events. The original design and robust build have contributed to their longevity. This is the ERA R5B called Remus, run by Prince Chula Chakrabongsy of Siam for his cousin Prince Bira to drive. All the cars have passed through many drivers over the years. And this ERA is R4D. It was the works team car of one of the creators of ERA, the British driver Raymond Mays. It was Mays, together with his friends Peter Burton and Humphrey Cook, who established the ERA company. The story starts in the years before the Second World War, when motor racing in Britain was mainly at Brooklands, and then at Donington and Crystal Palace, and also at hill climbs like Shelsley Walsh. The ERAs were built in Bourne in Lincolnshire at the Mays family home. Eastgate House was later to become the home of BRM. Mays was the premier hill climb driver of the time. He had persuaded many manufacturers and non-motoring companies to sponsor him against cars like this, the GN-based Spider of Basil Davenport. All of the great racing drivers of the day appeared at Shelsley Walsh. Here is Mays with a 4.5-litre Invicta. And with the Vauxhall Villiers and his business partner Peter Burton. It was the defeat of the Vauxhall Villiers at the hands of the Austrian hill climb and Grand Prix driver Hans Stuck that convinced Mays to build this car, the White Riley, that became the prototype ERA. The White Riley was designed as a hill climb car, but soon proved itself in circuit racing too. Victor Riley was a willing supporter of the ERA company. Mays and Burton chose to supercharge the 1.5-litre Riley 6-cylinder engine with a Murray Jamison blower, which gave it more power than the original 6-cylinder Riley unsupercharged unit. The car was also available in 1100 or 2-litre form. Voiturette racing was for 1.5-litre engines. Despite only having a 3-bearing crankshaft, the engine was capable of withstanding the high revs and the extra power it produced. Success on the hills was one thing, but would it be a winner on the track? Mays approached wealthy Humphrey Cook, a long-time racing colleague, to help him and Peter Burton build the cars on a chassis designed by Reed Railton. The chassis itself was manufactured by Thompson & Taylor of Brooklands. The car was then taken to Eastgate House, where the engine, Wilson pre-selected gearbox and the axle were fitted. ERA was financed by Humphrey Cook, who was an essential contributor to what was a loss-making business. Although ERAs were sold in quantity, there was never enough money to cover the expense of actually building them. Let's look at one of the first production ERAs. R1B is the ex-Richard Seaman car. Finished in black with silver wheels, this car was delivered to Seaman in 1935. This car is in pretty well original condition. In 1936, Voiturette cars didn't have independent suspension, unlike the Grand Prix cars of the day. On today's smooth, purpose-built circuits, that doesn't matter, but it made for a rough ride when the cars were racing in the 1930s. In 1937, ERA went over to Porsche-type independent front suspension with the C-type and with the 1938 D-type to try to cope with the Italian challenge from Maserati. The chassis wasn't modified except for the front, and they maintained non-independent suspension for the rear for their 190 brake horsepower Jamison supercharged engine. ERA didn't modify the C-Type and D-Type with its 220 brake horsepower Zoller supercharged engine. Limited slip differentials didn't exist, and so wheel spin was always a problem. For hill climbing, twin rear wheels were fitted, but the Wilson pre-selected transmission, though heavy, was efficient. The driver could select a gear before he came to the corner and just dip the clutch to effect the change. The B-Type ERA introduced small modifications to the A-Type, just giving a little more power. Many ERAs have had new cylinder blocks fitted over the years, but this car was, until recently, using its original block. The ERA made its debut in 1934 at the British Empire Trophy at Brooklands. The car wasn't particularly successful, but after setting records at Shelsley Walsh hill climb, they travelled to Donington Park for the Nuffield Trophy. Driven by Raymond Mays, the ERA took its first and most important win of its early career. It was this win which convinced several other drivers to come forward, putting money down to buy ERAs. Brooklands and Prince Bira at the wheel of an MG Magnet. For his 21st birthday, his cousin, Prince Chula Chakrabongse, bought him a brand new 1.5-litre ERA. Bira is seen here with Cyril, who was to become his first wife. Mechanic Raymond Lofty England pushing out one of the works ERAs onto the grid at Brooklands. Among the spectators, Prince Chula on the right and Bira's brother, Abbas. Once again, Bira finished well up, but he wasn't to win this race at Brooklands. Back in the Brooklands paddock with the right crowd and no crowding, R2A Romulus was to prove to be the most successful ERA ever built. Raymond Mays took his car to Shelsley Walsh for the 1934 autumn meeting and established a new record for the Worcestershire Hill, the oldest motorsport event in the world.
69 miles an hour.
Mays in the Beret with two Bugattis behind him. This is Donington Park, and the white ERA is driven by South African Pat Fairfield. Despite having only 1100cc, this was one of the most successful of the ERAs. Fairfield built an impressive reputation with the car and joined the works team. He celebrates the win.
ERA had got started, and Charlie Newcomb had come home before me from Milan. He was really at ERA. So he said, why don't you come up here? So I did. And then at that time, they only had the sort of the free works cars they'd built the previous year. And we were starting out to build the customer cars, which they sold. So I was occupied with that, and also with the running of the works cars. But I have to admit that I wasn't particularly over-impressed with the organisation at that time. So sometime during 1935, I went back to Elvis again for a while.
Demonstrating the long life of these cars, after the Second World War, Peter Bell owned two ERAs. This is R11B, affectionately known as Humphrey. Driven regularly by Martin Morris and his son over many years, this is a B-type ERA fitted with a full 2-litre engine, a unit that was usually used for hill climbs by Mays. The shortened tail was a post-war addition to this well-raced car. By 1936, ERAs were a force in voiturette racing. Here at Brooklands, early in the season, drivers try out their cars. Although not raced on the high-speed outer circuit, ERAs figured well in many road races held at Brooklands. Mays, in the Zoller-blown car, was particularly quick in 1936, using an engine that wasn't available to other competitors. The Chula Bira team purchased another ERA for 1936. Remus made its debut at Donington Park in the British Empire Trophy. R5B was the least successful of all Bira's ERAs. Having led the race in the early stages, a stone came up and struck Bira in the eye, breaking his goggles. Nevertheless, he carried on to finish 5th. The winner was another interesting and historic car, the ex-Whitney Straight 3-litre Maserati, driven by Richard Seaman and shared with Harry Rose. There was nothing that the ERAs, with their smaller capacity engines, could do about this ex-Grand Prix car. And here is Seaman, later in the season at Donington in the International Trophy, racing the 1.5-litre straight-eight Delage, a car that was to prove a worthy rival to the ERAs. Originally built in 1927 for Grand Prix racing, the Delage was to go on to a tremendous victory. The car had proved virtually unbeatable as long as Seaman didn't make a mistake. The Chula Bira team again said, if you can't beat them, buy them. But the Delage was never successful in Bira's hands. Chula and Bira, here at the Monaco Voiturette race in 1936. Bira, now recovered from the eye injury he suffered at Donington, was to drive the ERA Romulus against the best opposition that the continent could provide. In the early stages, the reliability of the ERA saw Romulus up to 3rd place and was soon in the lead. Grand Prix driver Louis Chiron watches on. Bira won the race, a highlight of his career. He returned to Monaco to race again after the war. During 1937, Chula and Bira found the opposition strong wherever they went. Lord Howe and Richard Seaman in the Isle of Man as the cars prepare for the start of the race. The old scoreboard and a little Austin getting sideways and charging the bank. It was a victory for Seaman, who was able to drive non-stop, whereas the ERAs had to have a pit stop for fuel. Bira had to be satisfied with 2nd place. By now, a number of ERAs were in private ownership. Among them, Le Mans winner Dr. Benjafield owned a car. Bira ventured abroad to Europe to race the works car. Unreliability caused them to swap components between Romulus and Remus, but they were rarely successful. Turin was one race in which they retired, while at Bern they were at least able to finish in 2nd place to Seaman, nursing the car home in what proved to be a very difficult race indeed. By now it was becoming clear that the Maseratis were very quick, but they didn't always have reliability. Lofty England remembers.
I was offered the job as chief mechanic for Chula, Prince Chula, with Bira driving, obviously. Now this, I think, was probably the best experience I had pre-war, because Chula was, you probably know, well up in the royal family of Siam and had equal rights to the throne of the bloke that got the king, job afterwards. And he was a very, very fine manager, excellent. But he did not interfere with the preparation of the cars. It was merely a question of saying, England, we want this car for that race and this car for that race. And we had 3 RAs, 1 Maserati, Delage and a Delahaye, 3 mechanics. So we were busy. So he would say, you want that car for this and that for that, can you do it? And if you said yes, it meant you did it. And if you said you couldn't, you had to say why, but that was acceptable. Then we'd do the cars, I would test them myself, say, is the car okay? All right, we practice. And Bira, as you probably know, was a superb little driver, and he just drove. And there was never any argument. If he didn't go fast enough in practice, Chula would stop him and say, Bira, you're slow. Go faster. So you go faster.
Bira decided not to compete against Hans Stuck, who came with his Auto Union to Shelsley Walsh to try and take back the outright record. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't in Stuck's favour. Here he chats to Lord Howe before the start. Bira was there to open the climb. Raymond Mays comes to the line with the Zoller-blown ERA. He was using twin rear wheels to increase grip off the line. Similarly equipped was the Auto Union Hill Climb Special of Stuck. A detachable steering wheel so that Stuck could get into the cockpit, and then the wheel is clipped on. The wet weather conditions didn't suit the powerful Auto Union. Despite driving with verve, Stuck couldn't wrest away the fastest time of the day from the ERA. Peter Whitehead's ERA leaves the line, and Mays follows on his second climb, wearing his white crash helmet. Basil Davenport with the ultimate Shelsley special, the Spider. From the muddy hill and the paddock at Shelsley, we look at the opposition that ERA faced in those days. ERA were filling up the grid. In the mid-1930s, the Maserati brothers were building racing cars for sale to private owners. Maserati challenged with a variety of engines. This is the six-cylinder version of the Voiturette Maserati, the 6C. The 4C used the four-cylinder unit, which was later developed into the 4CL and, after the Second World War, the 4CLT. The four-cylinder Maserati handled slightly better, being less front-end heavy. The success of the Voiturette formula and the challenge of Maserati brought Alfa Romeo into the category with their 158. There was another British challenger, the four-cylinder Alta with independent suspension, driven by George Abacassis. With John Heath, he built the HWM company into a principal challenger in the Formula 2 category, which succeeded Voiturettes. This gave the opportunity for drivers like Stirling Moss and Lance Macklin to compete, and the HWM used Alta engines, designed in the pre-war years to the 1500cc Voiturette formula rules. As the ERAs developed through 1936 and into 1937, the Zoller supercharged engine proved to be much quicker than the original Murray Jamison engine. Bira, who couldn't acquire a Zoller-blown car until 1938, campaigned the ex-Whitney Straight 3-litre Maserati. At Brooklands, he was able to see off the ERA opposition quite easily. The Isle of Man, 1937, on a wet day in the RAC light car race. The 2-year-old ERA Romulus was pitted against other ERAs. The Isle of Man round the Houses circuit raced along the Douglas Promenade and through hairpin bends, a Monaco of the Irish Sea. This race showed the low-speed acceleration of Bira's car, together with his wet weather driving skills. Here, Bira had the measure of the works cars. The Maseratis were also powerless against the young Siamese driver. Good preparation, sound pit work, and particularly good driving on the day saw Bira take one of his best wins. There was nothing that the works opposition could do about it, and losing to a 2-year-old car was a major disappointment. South African Pat Fairfield had the makings of a first-class driver. At the start of 1937, he was in top form. Production of the ERAs continued, and drivers and their mechanics began making their own modifications. Mays, well known as a sprint driver, had to give best to Bira. Sadly, in the 1937 Le Mans 24-hour sports car race, Pat Fairfield lost his life driving a BMW. The 1937 International Trophy at Brooklands, and Raymond Mays with the ERA versus Bira with the Maserati. In this race, Mays was triumphant. The Zoller-blown car was certainly quick, but what ERA needed was a completely new car. It was becoming more and more difficult for Humphrey Cook to maintain the required level of financial input to support the company. The demise of Fairfield saw Arthur Dobson, a young British talent, come to the fore at the wheel of an ERA. Dobson never realised his true potential, and once he'd spent his inheritance on racing, he had to retire from the sport. Dobson, fighting off Bira driving the 3-litre Maserati again, takes a fine victory for ERA in the works C-Type at Donington Park. The Crystal Palace circuit in London opened in 1937. The small Austin Sevens were able to compete against the bigger cars on the twists and turns of the tight Parkland circuit. Dobson, back in his own ERA, fought a fierce battle with Bira and Mays. Bira was crowned the King of the Palace, winning the London Trophy in 1937 with the old ERA Romulus. Bira continued his European forays in 1937. Bira talks to Austin Dobson, brother of Arthur. Bern in Switzerland, a difficult circuit, provided a win for Arthur Dobson, holding off Mays and Bira. The ERA story continues in the next Autofiles with a surprising turn of events that keeps the name in the forefront of racing.